Epilogue, June 28th, 2033. Greater Seattle Area, Washington, USA. Location undisclosed. Base 13, Project Osiris. Negative 61 degrees Fahrenheit, 0200 hours. General Turner took his cover off and tossed it carelessly to the desk. It skittered for a moment before bumping into the folder that sat squared up in the middle of the otherwise empty desk. The two men standing on the other side of the desk said nothing, simply standing at attention.
"This is it?"
He continued to pace. Neither man reacted. It was not a question for them.
"First, a database error causing us to lose all of our satellite offices. Then, 2 weeks of fighting and losing. We finally find our main satellite office, and this is what comes back?"
The general continued to pace in his office. He clenched his hands repeatedly. Castillo could hear the tendons cracking in the general's hands. He remained at ready.
"Oh, at ease, gentlemen. Tell me, what went wrong?"
Castillo relaxed from attention, but remained standing. He looked at Velasquez for a moment, then turned and began to speak.
"The computers in the office didn't survive the transition. From what little we gathered, everything we have is likely what was uploaded the night before the event. In the bunker? Where are my scientists? There was a, complication." "What complication?" snarled the general. "The Xenos threw everything at us. Not only did we face multiple of the larger Xenos, there was one that dwarfed the combat class." "Bigger than the combat class, huh? How big?"
The general's interest was clearly piqued.
"Sir, by my estimate, twice the size of a combat class Xeno. It took several hundred rounds of 50 cal to bring it down. It killed Thompson, sir."
"Twice," breathed General Turner. Castillo couldn't tell if it was awe or fear that he heard.
"Thompson died to the, let's call it a super class for now. So he died to the super?"
Castillo hesitantly nodded.
"Yes, sir. However, that wasn't the only fatal wound. It's true the super did have him in its hand, squeezing the life out of him." "Just the one hand?" asked the general. "Yes, sir. Just the one." "Fascinating. Please continue." "Well, sir, a stray round hit the hand that held Thompson. That's why the,
Castillo looked down at the folders on the desk. The other two stared for a moment as well.
"The papers that were recovered were damaged during that firefight."
General Turner nodded, then thought for a moment.
"That still doesn't explain where my scientists are." "You see, sir, they didn't just throw the super at us. Well, the super might have been living in the tower all along, but either way, they sent fighter ships after us, the fireball ones. One was shot down." "So, the new rounds do work?" "It appears so," replied Castillo.
He was careful to hide any hint of irritation at the constant interruptions.
"Continue," ordered Turner. "The craft appeared to impact the building, causing some instability. It apparently wasn't just structural instability. The craft came into contact with a certain set of lines." "The MF collector lines?" "Yes, sir. That either caused a short or an overload. I'm not certain. Above my pay grade, sir. It caused an explosion in the bunker. The reactor, you see. In the end, we could only fit one of the civilians into the bunker." "You let a civilian into the bunker?" "Yes, sir. One of the two that accompanied us. DeWeiser. Velasquez was the only other member that might have been able to fit, but we couldn't have him disrobed, sir." No, we couldn't." "Very well. Who is this DeWeiser, and what did he find?" "Dante DeWeiser. He's a vet with training. According to his dossier, he worked on Project Horus. He was there the day the discovery was made. I don't know if he's connected the two yet."
"Go on," said Turner as he made a hand-waving motion. He stood over the desk and began to sort through the papers as he listened.
"He went in and explored for 20 minutes. He came back with those papers. Said everybody was dead." "Wait, why again was he the only one who could fit?" "The explosion caused the inner doors to fall. The top was peeled open. He was the only one aside from Velasquez that could fit through the blast opening." "Okay. Did he find anything else?" "No, sir. That's it." "Thank you, Staff Sergeant. You as well, Sergeant Velasquez. Dismissed. I have calls to make. I want to keep an eye on this DeWeiser, and I have just the soldier in mind."
Found files. Dossier: DeWeiser, Dante, no middle initial. 5'10", 220 pounds. Redacted. DeWeiser was born to Harry and Regina DeWeiser in 2000. Harry DeWeiser retired 2 years later due to health effects from 9/11. Harry was a first responder to the Twin Towers attack. HD saved President Redacted from the rubble. He served with distinction. HD's father served as well and was active in several campaigns, including Redacted. HD's grandfather was present on Enola Gay during bombing run of August 6, 1945. The family has often been in the middle of pivotal moments of world history without recognition. Never married, no children, has a cat and a dog, appears to dote on them. DeWeiser served with distinction, if not high marks. He was better than average in anything he put his hand to, but never excelled. He never showed initiative. An adequate staff sergeant terminal at E5. Entered intelligence from boot camp, however he did not pursue additional firearms training. Did multiple tours in Redacted before permanent assignment to Redacted in Redacted program. After the military, DeWeiser joined fellow Air Force veteran Revan Jessamine. Highly accomplished when properly motivated. Shows signs of growing close with fellow employee Williams, Linda, on must-watch list. Potential candidate for Redacted program. Dossier: Revan Jessamine A. 5'5", 115 pounds. Redacted. Revan's family is the subject of debate. She is the daughter of Redacted. At age 18, she signed up for USAF. Unremarkable before her military career. Married at 21, divorced at 24. Appears amicable, different career paths. Revan is top of her class in all respects. Served with USAF for 8 years alongside DeWeiser. The two were considered inseparable. Revan is known to browbeat any command into allowing her to serve alongside DeWeiser. Graduated basic instruction at top of her class. Took advanced intelligence to stay with DeWeiser. Does not appear to be romantically involved. After incident on Redacted and workspace for Redacted program, Revan resigned from the military. She was contacted by Redacted to begin Envisionment Intelligence LLC. She was chosen as head for the satellite office. Was given 80 dossiers, told to pick 40. Refused to pick unless DeWeiser was guaranteed a slot after he left military. Due to her exceptional ability to run the office, the agreement was made. Revan has successfully run the office for 3 years. She has made it the highest-grossing satellite office of Redacted program. Is reluctant about the necessary changes to the office. Refuses to let anybody go. Stubborn, willful, highly intelligent. Potential candidate for Redacted program. Code word Redacted authorized. Dossier: Mason, Larry, no middle initial. 6'9", 270 pounds. Caucasian male, no identifying features. Bald. Mason was raised by Redacted on military bases all over the world. He served for 12 years in U.S. Army. Field medic trained. Sierra Foxtrot Division Redacted. Went on Redacted missions. Highly skilled, extremely successful. Strong morals. Unwavering determination. Higher than average strength even for his size. Extreme stamina. High intelligence. Often described as stoic. Extremely desirable subject for Redacted program. Dossier: Redacted, Tracy. Corrupted text. Further dossier file appears completely corrupted. Memo: 1 January 2033. Attention, Jesse Revan. RE, upcoming upgrades. Headquarters understands the impact to your daily work that the proposed upgrades will cause. It is not of concern. The previously discussed upgrades must be completed as soon as possible. An employee will need access during the evening of 7 Jan. Your office is to be closed down correctly. On Monday, 10 Jan, one of your employees will discover a problem. Damage will ensue. You are not to worry about the damage. Instead, calmly evacuate the office per protocol. The new server room will take approximately 2 months. RE, your office. The changes are necessary. The lease for the office across from yours has been revoked. The extra room for the additional space necessary will be taken from the adjacent office space. Further updates will follow. Current deadline for all projects is a window of June to July 2033. Exact date unknown. Refinement underway. Continue the Horus 2 project. The data is necessary to ascertain the history of the object in question. End memo. It appears unsigned. No apparent sender. Text file. mfrmii_theories.txt. Okay, these are my observations of this new reactor we've been working on. It seems to gather some sort of ambient energy through the related collectors. Then the energy is somehow converted to electricity using text corrupted. /28/33. We fired up the reactor for the first time. It is eerily silent, but the lights came on. The monitoring software shows the energy is being collected successfully. Output isn't what is desired yet. We'll tweak settings to text corrupted. 02/19/33. The reactor seems to fight any complex electrical system put too close to it. Had my third laptop fried yesterday when I put it down next to the reactor. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. I've requested additional hardware to determine what situations or conditions cause the aberrant behavior, but text corrupted. The rest of the document is corrupted. Several images are present, though corrupted. mfrmii-line.png, mfrmii-collector_line.png, mfrmii-collector_bldg_plan.png. Additionally, 2 PDFs also corrupted. mfrmii manual.pdf, mfrmii parts.pdf. To be continued. In the Hall of the Mountain King. I have been crawling on my stomach for hours, exploring this cave. I found it last summer when I was running through the fields of my home. I had gone out to get a husky to keep me company. I named her Darla, and she loved going for runs. I hated them, but it was a new habit I was trying to form to get back in shape. She did her part, always ready for the next run. I began to enjoy roaming our property, empty this far north. We had woods and fields, hills leading into mountains. There were streams to splash through and grass as high as my head. The air was still clean this far from the cities. We would run for short bursts when we started, but slowly I gained stamina. By the time summer came around, we could go for an hour or more. Originally, I had moved far into the country to get away from cities and the life it demanded. All I saw day in and day out was concrete, asphalt, glass, and steel. A house came for sale when I made the determination that I was done working behind a desk. It was far from the nearest major cities. Winters were cold and hard, but summers were pleasant. The property was 200 acres of land in the far north of Montana. It was totally off-grid, though the previous owner hadn't finished what he started. He was a survivalist, and he had it well stocked. There was enough food to feed a family of 4 for months. All it lacked when he passed was solar power and a well. Unfortunately for him, the survivalist didn't believe in doctors, so he waned in health, even while doing everything right. When he passed, the doctors discovered cancer all throughout his body. He died alone, far from anyone. Only his weekly delivery of supplies had caused him to be found. With no family, the state seized the property. They put it up on auction. I ended up being the only bidder. Nobody was interested in 200 acres 100 miles from the nearest major city. I sold my one-bedroom condo in the city I had lived in for over a decade. With that, I paid the property off entirely. I still had more than enough to put in a high-end solar array and dig a deep well that wouldn't run dry for 50 years or more of heavy use. I contracted the same supplier to bring supplies, but changed it to every other week. Then I began a large garden and built a greenhouse. Darla and I were the only ones living in the property, and between the garden and greenhouse, I was able to supplement our food enough that we only needed supplies once a month after the first 6 months. Self-sufficiency was a goal that I sought to realize through hard work. The first year was a whirlwind. I lost 40 pounds and my health was better than ever. Darla grew from a wiry pup into a large, gorgeous beast of a dog. We continued to run every day. There was so much property that we never went to the same area twice in that first year. I did have a neighbor, though they were roughly 17 miles away. There would be no casual dropping by for a cup of sugar. I planted hops in the spring and harvested before summer ended. All that fall I preserved our used hops to brew my own beer. The hops died and the leaves on the trees turned orange and red. We continued running, moving into the woods on the south end of the property. Our runs would last hours, Darla always ready to run longer. We had covered nearly half of the property by the time the first snows fell. I decided then we would retread old ground. The snow fell thick and white, blotting out whole details of the world. It caused a peaceful silence to fall, the kind that was impossible to find in a city. We would run in the early afternoon when the day was at its warmest. I loved watching Darla frolic in the snow. She would stomp about and play in the holes she made. She always brought a smile to my face. Our runs were so different after the snow fell. It was just us, the crunching snow, and our breath. Until one day when I stepped on a sagging patch of snow and fell through a crust of ice. I tumbled down a slope, feeling rocks jab and slash at me from all sides. I only had a light jacket on over my long-sleeved shirt. I had good winter pants on. When I came to a rest, I could only groan. I looked up through the narrow gap my tumbling body had made. I tried to rise and gasped in pain. I felt my forehead and found blood. I checked the rest of my body slowly. My leg was bent in the wrong direction. I had slashes through my jacket and pants in several places. The tumble had been a rough one. I shouted for help, for Darla. I couldn't hear her anywhere. The snow was piled high, though it had only been mid-calf when I was running. I could see more than 6 feet of snow before the steel-gray sky loomed. Behind me, at the back of the opening, sat a yawning darkness. Black so deep I couldn't tell if the far wall was 6 inches or 60 feet away. I was no longer moving. This was a dangerous lack of action in the dead of winter. My legs stiffened, cold seeping through my pants. My skin tightened up. The ache went bone deep. Sensation slowly faded. My stomach rumbled and my nose and throat ached with thirst. I had snow all around me, ice under me, and no water I could drink. Putting snow in my mouth was a surefire way to kill myself through hypothermia. I began to shiver uncontrollably. I was comforted for a time, knowing my body was fighting to keep me alive. I grew far more concerned when hours had passed and I stopped shivering. I closed my eyes in exhaustion. I couldn't shout anymore. Fatigue claimed me, dragging me into the black depths. Lights swirled in the darkness, blazing bright and darker than any black I had ever witnessed. They flowed over and through me. In a sudden tug, I was looking down at myself. My skin was blue, pale, and faded with cold and death. My body tightened in death, curling into a fetal position as the muscles dehydrated and gradually froze solid. Night fell overhead, then day rose. The sky continued its cycle for days, then weeks. The snows thawed, pouring around my corpse. It decayed rapidly in late spring. Time raced forward, heedless of my silent screams to go back. I watched, helpless, as my bones were picked clean by animals and insects. The sun shone fiercely for weeks in summer, bleaching my bones white. Time sped ever faster, soon causing the cave to widen, then crumble. Moss crept from the rocks, engulfing my bones. Dirt fell in and grass sprouted. I watched as all evidence of my existence was swept away from the world. Darkness fell over the world, long and permanent. I had no idea how long it had been since I died. It felt like lifetimes, or perhaps seconds. I was snapped out of the vision by the most wonderful sound I had ever heard. Voices shouted. I could hear Darla barking and yipping. I tried to shout, to be heard. Nothing escaped me but a pained wheeze. I stuffed half a handful of snow in my mouth to wet it. I licked my numb lips and tried again. My voice cracked with effort, but it was enough. A light began to shine on the edge of the hole I had tumbled through. It was at this point I realized the sun had already set. The light crept forward, then suddenly it was blinding me. I held a hand up to block the light. I feebly cried for help. The light switched off and I saw the face of my neighbor. He saw my leg and immediately used his cell phone to call for help. Then he swept a bit of snow from the ledge. Some fell down onto me. I felt warmth spreading in my body. He talked to me for the hours that we waited. He refused to let me sleep. I grew to hate him as he shouted at me. He wouldn't come down to help me. I only wanted to sleep, to let my body fall into the warmth. Eventually, he turned away. I heard some monstrous noise muffled by the snow. He left, then returned some minutes later. 2 EMTs shined their lights on me, then disappeared. They returned a few minutes later with a large plastic orange stretcher. They told me to roll onto it and buckle myself on. It took an eternity with my frozen hands. They carried me back up the slope. Once I crested the edge of the hole, they crouched and lifted in unison. Then they quickly carried me off. I learned what the monstrous noise was a moment later. Helicopter blades whirred overhead, deafening me. The helicopter lifted off and they put a headset on me. I could hear them talking. They said I owed my neighbor my life. They said I was lucky. The flight took hours. When we landed, I was quickly transferred to a hospital cot and whisked down below. Basic measures were taken to bring my body back to temperature. I could see my hands and feet were blackened. I had frostbite from my extended stay below ground. I was dosed with something and fell once more into blackness. This time, I welcomed it. When next I woke, I was in a bed. My entire body hurt. My leg was in a cast. I raised a hand toward my face. I had all of my fingers. They were black, but they moved. I checked my other hand, finding it also whole. I checked my toes, and they were all intact. A nurse entered the room a moment later. She welcomed me back to the land of the living. She also spoke about how lucky I was, how wonderful my dog was, and my neighbor. I mutely nodded. I was lucky to live. I was not lucky to find that hole the way I had. She dosed me as well, saying I needed rest. I stayed for 3 days in the hospital while they treated me for hypothermia, frostbite, and extreme dehydration. When I was released, they promised to sort everything out with my insurance. I had to call my neighbor to pick me up from the big city. He showed up hours later and quietly drove me back. We barely spoke, though I did thank him. He talked about how amazing Darla was. I could only agree. A bill showed up in my mail. It listed a huge number. I fought it and my insurance company. Eventually, it was taken care of. The cast came off 6 weeks after my fall. My leg had shrunk from disuse. I started physical therapy to help regain strength. By the time spring rolled around, I was able to jog with Darla again. Every day, I pushed a little harder. Every week, I improved the speed and distance I could run. The darkness at the back of the hole I fell into was never far from my mind. I made plans. On my next trip into town, I stopped by the library. A geological survey had been done more than 20 years before by the county. My property was included in the survey. The results were a little puzzling. The foothills were riddled with caves. The survey listed no caves within dozens of miles of my property. Seismic imaging had turned up nothing save the underground river far below that my well drew from. I opened my disused email and sent a letter to several friends in the survivalist community. I asked them what they thought about this hole on my property. I knew answers would take weeks, so I logged out and left the library. That same trip, I made a stop at the hardware store. I bought new tools, including glow sticks, a shovel, marking posts, and rope. The next day, I ventured out onto the property, hunting down the hole. Without the snow, it was easier to see the hole when I eventually found it. The hunt itself took 6 hours because everything looked different without the blanket of white obscuring everything. Landmarks were not the same. When I found the hole, I placed several marking poles around the perimeter of it. They stood tall and bright for easy sighting. By that point, I was tired from the hunt. I called it a day and went home for dinner and sleep. That night, I had strange dreams, filled with dancing colors and strange shapes behind a curtain of shadow. I woke in the morning, quickly forgetting all but the vaguest of details from my dreams. I prepared for a long trip in the warming day. When I arrived, I was perplexed. I could have sworn the poles were around the hole when I left the day before. Instead, they led to it like a cone placed on one side. I placed the further poles around the hole again, noting the solid ground I walked over. The exhaustion of the day before must have caused me to misplace the poles. I cracked and shook the first light stick, tossing it into the hole. It rattled and fell down the steep slope. It stopped 6 feet down on the flat surface I had lain on the winter before. I knelt and cracked a second stick, tossing it farther into the hole. The second stick skittered across the flat area I had lain on. About 4 feet from the wall, it dropped into darkness. In the brief moment of light, I saw the far wall was approximately 4 feet from the cliff. I had come very close to falling into the cave at the back. With new food for thought, I walked back to my house. Nights were still chilly in spring, though not like they had been even a decade before. Still, a fire sounded comforting. I built the fire and relaxed in one of the recliners that had been left behind. It had one side to the fire to benefit from the light. Nearby sat bookshelves. The shelves were lined with books, both new and old. The man that had lived in my house previously had been Norwegian by birth. His family immigrated to America when he was young, but they brought their culture with him. I had learned all of that when checking out the house before buying it. His collection had been included with the house, and I had merged it with my own. 3 books in particular caught my eye that night. 2 were in Norwegian, their titles indecipherable to me. The third was in English. I pulled all 3 out, but set the 2 in Norwegian aside. The third I took with me back to the recliner. It was a book of Norwegian fairy tales. I began reading, curious about the strangely mature material contained in what appeared to be a children's book. It spoke of trolls and gnomes, of adventures that went well and others that ended terribly. My eyes grew heavy as I read on. At some point I fell asleep, the book still in my hands. I had strange and vibrant dreams that night. When I woke in the morning, I was stiff from sitting in the recliner. I put the book aside and stretched out. After my morning run with Darla, I decided to return to the library. As I left the house, I grabbed the 2 Norwegian books. My email was still empty when I checked it at the library. I searched the internet for the books in question and found their English equivalents. The first was a play called Peer Gynt. It had a story of a man who refused to take responsibility for his own actions and fled to another country. The other book was focused on trolls, which had their own rich history and lore. I checked the 2 books out and returned home. Once more, at the end of the day, I lit a fire and relaxed in the recliner. The first book, Peer Gynt, grabbed me immediately. Peer, the titular character, recklessly shirked responsibility. He always chose to pursue his wishes instead of taking responsibility. He lived an entire life centered around the ethos best described as, "Not my problem, I'll go around it." I continued to read the play until I fell asleep. In my dream, I stood at the foot of an impossibly massive mountain. The slopes curved up well into the sky and beyond sight. It looked like the stars themselves orbited the peak of the mountain. In front of me stood a pair of intricately carved stone doors. The doors were imposing in their size, seemingly big enough to accept the largest of man's vehicles with ample space to spare. The longer I looked at them, marveling in their majesty, the larger they seemed. Runes appeared to crawl along the surface, constantly shifting in the edges of my sight. The strange light that seemed to permeate the world caused colors to reflect out of the carved runes. Flecks of grassy greens, sky blues, and bruise-like violets seemed almost exposed by the runes as they writhed along the surface. Beneath the stone, in the flecks of color, another language could be seen. The more I focused on the ancient letters, the more my head hurt. I began to piece a mental image together of the letters that shifted below the surface. I fell to my knees, though I couldn't tell you why. Perhaps I sought clarity, a closer look, or maybe even in supplication to an unknown source. I snapped awake in my bed, tangled in sheets and soaked in sweat. I had no recollection of preparing for bed, let alone getting in. A glance at the bedside clock showed it to be an hour before dawn. I rose anyway, unwilling to chance more sleep, fearing the dreams it might bring. I cooked a hearty breakfast and prepared rations for the exploration I would be performing in the cave. The sun had long risen by the time I let Darla out to run. I packed my hiking backpack, attached rope, and set out. The walk took a solid 20 minutes. It was like the darkened abyss called to me. I walked straight to it, not taking note of anything around me. When I arrived, I set 2 anchors deep into the ground. Once they were set, I attached the rope. I used a belay system to safely descend. I kicked the rope into the hole and lowered myself in. I attached my belay systems to the rope and tossed the rest of the rope into the cave. I could hear the rope unfurl for a long time. It was 250 feet long. I lowered myself over the lip of the cliff and began to descend. I set a pace that, by my figuring, should have taken me the full 250 feet in about 15 minutes. I could feel myself descending. The darkness was all around me. I had a headlamp, though it seemed to only go a handful of feet before being swallowed by darkness. I dropped a glow stick and it disappeared before hitting the bottom. I descended for over an hour. I should have been exhausted. Instead, I felt something akin to a runner's high. Eventually, the rope ended. My feet touched ground as I ran out. My headlight showed walls on all sides only a few feet away. Opposite the wall I had descended sat a small tunnel set near the door. It was wide and low, maybe 4 feet across and 2 feet high. I knelt down, shining my headlamp into the tunnel. I had to shrug my backpack off before I could crawl into the tunnel. The walls seemed to press in for a moment. Apprehension gripped me. I crawled forward, fighting the sudden urge to turn and run. The tunnel opened up, growing taller. I was soon able to stand and walk normally. Even as I continued forward, I questioned if I should. I reasoned it out, trusting that I had been led to this cave for a reason. Something drew me ever onward. Something stirred in the back of my mind, perhaps the anxiety I was sure I should have felt. Instead, I felt as calm as the dead air around me. 1 foot in front of the other, I walked inexorably forward. Even when I tried to turn back, I found myself moving forward. Suspicion bloomed in my mind. I began to grow concerned. Perhaps whatever lay at the end of this endless tunnel had an influence over me. The thought floated around for a moment before subtly disappearing. A gust of wind billowed over me, causing me to blink. Condensation glittered on the walls so close to me as I found myself crawling on my belly once more. Rock pushes against my back as I continue. The tunnel is narrow and I feel claustrophobic. I'm struggling forward, pulled through this crevice. My knees and elbows are sore, scraped by the rock. I'm watching now, locked inside my mind. I do not know when it happened, but I am no longer in control of my body. All I can do is watch, wait. My body continues through the tunnel for an eternity. I'm trapped, screaming silently in the dark confines of my own mind. My body has become an instrument to another will. I try to panic. I try to feel the terror that by all rights should be mine. Instead, I feel a detached calm. Once more, my eyes blink. The rock is gone. My torch gutters in the wind. Dust is swirling in front of my eyes, kicked up by my breath. Something is wrong. My light is still mine, but it is wrong. My body stands, still enslaved to another. It is stiff, creaking with disuse. I've only been standing in this void for seconds. I cannot see far. The shadows themselves seem to live. My torch is guttering, sputtering, dead. Darkness has settled around me. The weight of untold volumes can be felt in the darkness. I'm standing in a space that is immeasurable to my mind. It is open and vast. A gust of stagnant air is drawing me onward, telling tales of millennia past. Epics echo in the distant reaches of this place, times so long gone that stars have been born and died of old age. 1 foot in front of the other, I have been walking for decades, centuries. I lost my mind to time and unchanging darkness long ago. I only have short windows of lucidity now. I have never been hungry, never tired. I have not known sleep in so many ages I do not understand the concept anymore. The endless cycle of stepping on stone, of listening to my feet shuffle forward has ended. I listen, I look about. For the first time in untold eons, something is different. Stars. Stars are all around me, glittering in the darkness. My body reaches a hand out and a wall is there. The stone looks cold, barren. The surface is rippling like water. I can see my hand even from the miles away that it is. My hand is sinking into the pliant, fleshy surface of the appendage before me. The gray stone is mottled, is green, is healthy pink flesh, is ashen and dead. It is all of these and more. It is none of these. My hand is retracted, my eyes are closed. I cannot bear the majesty, the unending garishness. My body is once more mine. I stumble, not knowing my own body after so long apart, so long held a hostage in my own mind. Sounds rush in, sounds that hadn't existed a second ago. I am looking around, and I am surrounded. Throngs of initiates kneel all around me. They kneel in supplication, the infinite hordes all kneeling toward the wall. Some prayed to the sky, some touched their heads to the ground, some lacked a head at all. I looked to the sky to see what they pray to. I can see and cannot unsee. My eyes are seared open, my mind flayed by the sight. The wind reverses directions. It no longer blows across my face. A long, strong gust pulls my clothes, pushes back. The wind has once more reversed. The hot, moist air pushes against my chest with an insistence. I'm still looking up. Ever upward, I have realized what I see. This wall of stone, of flesh, is a toe. The nail is far beyond any range I can understand. Understanding is crashing through my brain. I am looking upon a higher being, an elder one, a creature of such immense power, enormous size that my mind fails to grasp even the fullness of a single foot. Still, I am compelled. I look farther, seeking the answer I am terrified of. Farther into the abyss do I gaze. I can see one of the supplicants turning toward me in the corner of one eye. I cannot tear myself away from what I look upon. I watch in my periphery as it sees the reflection of the glorious, radiant, maddening sight before me. It opens its mouth, perhaps to look, perhaps to scream. It is immolated, the heat washing over me. Ashes have fallen to the ground. The creature is no more. I am still me. I am certain I am still me. I can feel the abyss gazing back. It is looking into my deepest depths, knowing me more fully than I can ever know myself. It has shifted its attention from the whole of the universe to me. I have become a singularity of focus. I stand resolute, unwavering. The abyss gazes at me, through me. It has come to know me, down to the molecule, the atom, the very quarks of my being. I am granted sight. The abyss is no abyss at all. The Elder One is seated upon a throne of mountains. The mountains that are so vast that an entire universe is but a grain of sand at the foot of one. I can no longer function in any realm that imposes limits. 3 dimensions fail to grasp the slightest hint of the being that observes me. The Elder One is made of time, of chaos, luck and chance and creation and destruction. It is made of cosmic energy. Then it stepped forward. My head is no longer craned back. I stand face to face with its avatar. It is of infinite height, yet eye to eye with me. The avatar that is presented only strains sanity to breaking, instead of total obliteration. Tentacles writhe about on its face. The face sits on a head above a body that could be generously described as human. Every proportion was perfect in its wrongness. Every proportion failing to be understandable in any perceivable dimension. The eyes gaze at me, swirling pools of stars, universes colliding, living, dying. It extends a hand to me, one I willingly take. It is drawing me in, across all the light years that separate us. My skin slows, my hair and eyes, my muscles and organs destroyed in the radiance I behold. I am nothing but a ghost in a skeleton that itself crumbles to component atoms in the fires of creation and the death throes of infinite universes. Still, I hold on to the hand and looked into the eternity that stared at me. Then it spoke. The sound destroyed reality. The stone bench beneath my feet ceased to exist. It asks one question, the most important it has ever asked. Words are not for it. Words cannot describe it, but words I will use as pale as they are. It says just 3 words, in every language to ever exist, but in just one language, one that never should have existed. It says,
"Who are you?"
I awoke on my property, covered in dirt and grime. The sun was high, the grass brown. Heat prickled my skin. Darla was licking me, and she was scrawny and matted. I struggled to my feet, feeling the dust of ages fall from me. The hike back to my house was long. I completed it in half an hour. Dust was on everything. Mail was piled on the front stoop, dating back months. The newest newspaper sat fresh on top of the pile. It seemed the mailman didn't care that I hadn't picked up the mail in all that time. The newspaper was hard to read in the failing light. A cold breeze ruffled the pages. I had been missing for 3 months. The date read, July 13th, 2033.